This is John Hanratty, and this is Hanratty on Karate. Today I'd like to talk a little bit about stances. This came up recently in a class I was teaching when a student asked me why I referred to some stances as inside tension and other stances are outside tension. However, let's go back to the basics, why we use stances. Stances to me are the platform from which you deliver your technique. You may not deliver every technique from a stance. For example, you can be in motion while you're making a snapping technique, or uchiwaza as we say, like a raken. You're not in a stance while you're delivering a kick, but you do need a balance and strong base to deliver a good kick. So stances basically give you stability. They will not give you mobility. So therefore, what I look upon stances as something that's very transitory. So for an instant, we hold a stance. That's when we have a good, strong platform and we can deliver a good, strong technique, almost instantaneous. The difference being when we're moving and we're looking for momentum, we're using the stance along with kime or focus to stop the technique or stop the movement. So stance is good. It's good for delivering force and it's good for resisting force. So there's a number of stances that we use. A lot of them we need to build up the lower body and legs because this carries the upper body and provides the connection to the floor that's necessary for us to complete a technique. So strong and well-executed techniques will largely depend on a strong and stable base. So all stances really require facing the proper direction for the purpose of the technique to be executed, nice relaxed shoulders, abdomen tense but not to the point of immobility, but enough to control your movement. Your back straight and pretty much always perpendicular to the floor, with some exceptions, with your hips level. From the base, all parts of the body must work together to execute the technique. An incorrect stance will make such muscle interactions difficult, and the techniques will consequently be less effective, since it will bring unnecessary muscles into play and will be detrimental to fast and powerful movements. What I mean by that is if you're trying to hold your balance with an incorrect stance, you're not going to be able to use those muscles behind your technique because they're too busy trying to rectify your balance and stuff like that. So the stability of your stance depends on the area encompassed by your feet. So this brings into play center of gravity theory, and that plays an important role. As your center of gravity lowers, stability increases. Now you either have stability or mobility. At the moment we're looking at stability. So the center of gravity should also be kept near the center of the base. If the center of gravity shifts towards the outer limits or goes outside of your base, then you're going to lose your balance. Another factor in the effectiveness of a stance is the angle of pressure exerted against the floor. So the use of correct pressure will ensure the stance is stable and will enhance it in executing a technique. All of these factors must be balanced when executing techniques. There's no one stance that's going to be suitable for all occasions. All have strengths and weaknesses, and the stance that you're going to use will depend on the circumstances, okay? But they should only be used for transition purposes, moving from one position to another. In modern kata, unfortunately, we see modern kata performances where people hold a stance for unnaturally a long time, and very often with a technique that is no use. If they make a block and they hold it in that stance, you've lost all purpose from the block. Your purpose when blocking should be only ever to make a counter. If you don't want to get hit, get out of there. But blocking is not a big deal, especially when you're in a confrontation that's not mutually agreeable. By that I mean a fight that you didn't really want, or one person doesn't want. When you're in the dojo and you're sparring, that's a mutually agreeable situation. And yeah, your blocks are going to be effective then because usually you know what the other guy is going to do. Anyway, getting back to my stances, outside tension stances. So outside tension and downward pressure are synonymous with these stances. The position of the feet and the direction of pressure are usually what differentiates each stance. So if you're in front stance, for example, which is a very common stance in Shotokan, in Japanese we call Zenkotsudachi. Okay, this is frequently used and it's effective both defensively and offensively, particularly effective in delivering techniques using rotation. The actual positions will vary depending upon which style or which kata, but it's generally common to the different styles that the feet are hip-width apart and both flat on the ground. A straight line should be along the outer edge of the lead foot to the target. The rear foot, as far as possible, pointed forward in order to engage the rear hip. If your back foot is pointed 90 degrees out to the side, which a lot of beginners tend to do, then you're not going to be able to get your hip into motion for a rotation to put any force behind your technique. The front leg should be bent and forced a little bit outward so the knee is over the toe. We will say over the toe, but just ahead of the ankle is good. The center of gravity will fall a little bit ahead of the center of the supporting base, so the front foot bears about 60% of the body pressure. The position allows for a fast forward motion and generating power through the thrusting of the rear leg when you're using an offensive technique. The length of the stance when I'm training to build up the legs is usually about 1.5 to 2 shoulder lengths in length. It can vary from style to style. Some styles have much higher stances, some have much deeper and lower stances. I prefer to train in a deep stance and then just go to a higher stance if you're doing kumite or if you're relaxed in competition. So the next stance we look at, basic stance, is back stance or kokotsudachi. So this stance is excellent because it's very flexible. It allows you to step quickly into another stance or position. The center of gravity is to the rear, within the base of the support, so about 70% of the body pressure is against the back foot. You need to lower the hips, bend the rear knee at about 40 degrees. The front foot faces forward along with the front knee, and the back one forms a right angle to it with the heels in line. The front knee should also be slightly bent, but you want your knee to fall just behind your heel, if not further back, as long as you can keep your back knee over your back toe. The shifting of the body weight, either forward or backwards, allows a great deal of changing position and changing your distancing when you want to use this stance. Usually in this stance, we would use it for a counter-rotation form of technique where the body shifts, pull the hip back, but the technique goes in the opposite direction. It's very hard to get the hip forward from the back leg and to keep your heels in line. Side stance or kibadachi. So this position roughly resembles that of a person riding a horse. Knees are bent outward and the legs are wide apart. Again, 1.5 to 2 shoulders. Correct balance has got to be found since the feet are quite far apart, and they would weaken their stance by hampering fast movement. But feet closer together would probably translate into a higher center of gravity and unstable balance. Body weight should be equally distributed on both legs and the whole surface of the feet. So try to get your feet as flat on the ground as you can. The muscles of the legs and hips are tightened and the back is kept straight. An old translation of the Japanese for this stance was to claw the earth. In teaching those 3 stances, I've found it a nice, easy way to remember. If you're doing front stance, your knee is over your front toe. If you're doing back stance, your knee is over your back toe. And if you're doing side stance, kibadachi, then your knees are over both toes. Hips in front stance push towards the front heel. In back stance, front hip pushes towards the back heel. In side stance, both knees are forced out. These are 3 basic stances that use outside tension. So what I mean by outside tension is you want to tighten your glutes, feel like you're turning the top of the thighs outward, so pushing the pelvis forward and then pressing down. So we have outside tension and downward pressure. There are a number of stances that use this for a base, and there's 3 of them, but we also use it in stances like Furudachi or Sochin stance, rooted stance in English. We use it in our normal shizentai, or just standing up. You should have your feet forward, engage the core underneath, shoulders lowered, but again, it's a little outside tension. Renoji dachi, or T-stance, also the same thing. So how do these differ from inside tension? Well, inside tension, we use a number of them. Sanchin dachi, Hangetsu dachi, Nakawashi dachi, or cat stance. What we have is a narrow position of the feet, generally with the toes turned in towards each other in the case of Hangetsu and Sanchin. So, despite the narrow position of the feet, the stance does provide a strong base for defensive techniques. So again, your feet usually placed about shoulder width, particularly in, say, Sanchin, and each foot pointing inwards. Then you want to kind of collapse your knees in, all right? And then lift up from the pelvis without pushing the knees out, but kind of lift your pelvis up so that your core is extremely tight. So if you can try that, you're probably going to find that it's really difficult to move. You're not really going to move awfully fast from this stance. You have to completely relax and then move. So this is why stances are only transitory. So the other inside tension stance that I like is Hangetsu dachi. And we use this in a whole kata, Hangetsu, or half moon stance. So this is a midway position between front stance and Sanchin, which is hourglass stance. Position of the feet is similar to front stance, maybe about 3/4 of front stance. Again, the knees drop inwards, as in Sanchin or hourglass stance, and then lifting the hip. Okay? It can be useful in an attack, but it's more favored for defensive techniques. The other stance we're going to look at for inside tension is Nakawashi dachi, or cat stance. Now, you see this a lot, particularly in katas like Unsu. And it's favored a lot by Shito-ryu stylists. They use this rather than back stance. In fact, this is the precursor to Kotkutsu dachi, which is pretty much unique to Shotokan style. It enables you to withdraw to your back leg for distance training, and it also gives you the feeling of compressing your back leg almost like a spring ready to explode. It's quite an elastic position. So you want to give the impression like a cat ready to pounce. If we start from back stance, what we want to do is bring the front foot back and raising the heel as we do it till only the ball of the foot's in contact with the ground. That's on your front foot. Turn the knee of the front leg slightly inward, keeping the back absolutely straight. Your rear foot would be about 45 degrees angle. And you need to bend your knee and push your weight forward so that if somebody dropped something from your back, it would fall slightly ahead of your heel, on the front side of your heel. You don't want to be back, okay? So the rear leg in this instance should be taking about 90% of the pressure. So this allows for major compression and fast reactive techniques such as front leg kicks. It also makes for a really effective compression so that you can attack or move on to another position. Common denominators for inside tension stance are usually narrower than outside tension. The knees tend to fall in, hips rise forward, and the pelvis lifts up. The posture straight and perpendicular. So lots of interesting things in the stances, and stances need to be practiced. Okay, once you've mastered the stances, then you should practice moving rapidly and smoothly from one stance to another. There's a drill I use, unfortunately caught the name Hanratty's box. Nothing to do with me, it's just a drill that I made up. But if you start off in front stance, maybe left leg, all you're going to do is go from one stance to the other, alternating feet. So the first stance we're going to go through from front stance will be another front stance. You could make any technique you want on this. I usually go with oisuki, or straight punch. Then squeeze everything together as you turn 90 degrees and make kibadachi. And you can make empiuchi if you want to. Then squeeze again, bringing the right leg in, and step forward into kokotsu dachi. Okay, this is back stance. You can use shitoki. Then turning once more, squeezing down, push the front leg out, drop down into fudadachi. Use gidambarai, whatever you want. Then we're going to switch to Nakawashi dachi, taking the hip past the front foot and then snapping it back into Uchiuki in Nekoashi or back cat stance. And then starting off once more, we'll start off with another inside stance, Hangatsudachi, and usually just make Gidambarai. Then off we go again, using the other side. So the box goes around one way and then goes around the other way, roughly in a rectangular form. It's a nice drill. It's probably better seeing it than listening to it. But keep in mind, changing stances always involves a shift in the position of the center of gravity. Try to keep it low, particularly when you're going from one stance to another. Strong balance and correct posture need to be maintained. Do not stick your butt out. Keep your tail tight underneath, shoulders relaxed and down. Try to not raise or lower your hips. Try to move in a straight line, a horizontal line best. All movements should be smooth and swift. What I mean by that is, and I've judged many katas on it, world level, national level, international level. When I'm looking for somebody who has mastery over kata, it's going to be most obvious in a turning technique. It's got to be smooth and swift, and the balance has to be there. And the technique that's going to be delivered on the turn or within the turn has to be spot on. So this is where you're looking for mastery of a kata or a technique. When people turn and they move smooth and fast through the transition period. So when stepping, try to have your feet make a gliding motion. You don't want to lift your foot up or drag it. You lift it up, it's only got to come down again. You drag it, it's going to slow you down and probably affect your balance. All parts of the body must begin and end their action together. If you're doing a fast motion, you should start quickly, finish suddenly, using Kime or focus. I'll do another little talk on Kime in another podcast, but hopefully if you have got any questions on stance, or if this has raised any issues with you, just let me know or ask your instructor. And if he's honest and he doesn't know, he'll tell you and then he'll go and find out. That's what good instructors do. Usually he'll know. But there's a whole depth of stuff just in stances. And as I said, no stance is perfect for every situation or every technique. When you're kicking, you're not in a stance at all. Jumping kicks, you're certainly not in a stance. Okay, so they're just transitions, just a moment of transition and then you're on. You're either stable or you're mobile. You cannot be both. Okay, if you're in a stance and you're stable and it provides the stability, the minute you move, you're unstable or you're mobile. Hope you've enjoyed it. Let me know if you have any questions. Talk to you again. Bye now.